we could call roll.
Committee Member Blackerby,
Here.
Hoffman Gray,
Here.
Moss, Pritchett,
Here.
Tabor,
Here.
Chair Bradley, Vice Chair France.
Here. Great. First off, I'd like to entertain any changes to the agenda.
There are no changes to the agenda.
Great. Thank you. And then we have 10 minutes for public comment, if there are any comments from the public. Seeing none, move to consent calendar, approval of the minutes from our September 23rd minute. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? And I'd like to compliment our staff, and especially Kim right here, for getting our meeting video cast on the web on the city's Granicus system, even with markers, so you can find specific items that we've talked about. So thank you for doing that.
I move to approve.
Second.
All for approval of the minutes.
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain?
All right, with one abstention and 5 approvals, minutes are approved. Next, I'd like to move to the report from the MTD, the monthly and quarterly and annual report for fall. Is there any presentation? Okay, I'd like to move for any comments from our chair, from our committee members on the reports. If there are enough comments, maybe we could start on the end of the dais with you, David.
Well, I don't have much of a comment. I think in a perfect world, you like to see. Oh, thank you. In a perfect world, you like to see some sort of a pattern in numbers so you can kind of understand them. But looking at the numbers here, we're up one month, down the next month, up, and it's pretty much seesawing back and forth. So it's hard to get a handle on any of it. It's good to see our routes are being used. Makes you feel you're putting your money in the right place. And we have I guess the biggest drop we see in the numbers is like a 33 or 36% drop in the use of the Coder commuter lot shuttle. And I'm taking that to mean that the rise in unemployment is affecting that lot, since that's a lot used by folks driving into downtown. So so I guess it's more of a wait and see what happens there in the coming months with the changing economy to see if that's a continuing trend or not. But that's pretty much all my comments.
All right, thank you, Committee Member Tabor. Committee Member Pritchett, Dave.
I have nothing really big this time. I think when we see sort of an annual report, we can get the trends a little better. And I just request that MTD put in more charts instead of tables, so it's easier to see trends. But my overall impression continues to be that for the bus routes that the city has its financial fingers in, the ridership is pretty steady, and we see it fluctuate because of, like Mr. Tabor mentioned, employment patterns, or another bus is tapping into the rider base, or it's good weather or bad weather, or there's 4 weekends instead of 3. Those are, I think, why we see the little blips. But in my judgment, it's steady ridership, and a lot of the griping you hear in the community is just because someone's looking at the bus at the end of the day when there's 2 people on it instead of 20, like it is at 3 p.m. So that's why we have data to smooth out those impressions. So thanks to MTD again.
Great. I'd like to make a few comments, I guess, to the general public and to our staff and to the MTD, perhaps viewing in the future on the city's website. First off, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention that for both the downtown and waterfront shuttle, and I noticed for one other route, There is a noticeable increase in delay for round trip. I think for the downtown waterfront shuttle, it went from 30 to 35 minutes to 45 minutes round trip. And I don't have that fact in front of me, but essentially the MTD is seeing increased costs due to traffic congestion. Because of delays in the route, it costs more to operate the same routes. I think it's just of note because traffic congestion has costs, much more than just the MTD. As well, the MTD is a great bellwether because we can notice whatever challenges they have in terms of traffic congestion are certainly affecting the rest of the citizens of Santa Barbara. And so it is definitely of note that we're seeing the impacts of traffic congestion, which is projected to get worse in the coming years. I'm also concerned about the Carrillo commuter lot, and I'm wondering if it is entirely attributable to unemployment, or if also our policies for employee parking should be reviewed because of the potential drop there, and just also I'd like to see the overall usership of that lot and the employee parking program. The last comment I have is kind of a fun one. I have a web link to the world's first transit appliance. Long ago, I made a comment to our MTD colleagues about the potential benefit of having LED indicators with next bus arriving. So let's say you're downtown and trying to take a bus out to Goleta or across downtown, or maybe you're even State Street looking for the waterfront downtown shuttle. There's an appliance now for $200 that can be made using, obviously this is not what I imagine we would use, but the link is www.streetfilms.org/the-world's-first-transit-appliance. And it's interesting that a lot of cities are playing with much cheaper ways of communicating to the bus riding public when the next bus is arriving, using just data that is available. So perhaps in the future that might be more feasible for our MTD system. That's all my comments. Committee Member Blackerby. All right, Committee Member Kaufman-Gray.
Just to comment, I think it is great that August did see a nice increase overall. And just to piggyback on the Carrillo lot, as someone that works in that area, I've always said, and Browning can know, that I think it's very hard to correlate the shuttle with the lot, because the lot, when you buy that lot, the shuttle is part of the package for buying your monthly rate. And if it's really nice weather, people like to walk. So it's really hard to say the ridership is based on lack of use. I think we really should look at, is the lot completely full, 100%? Is it, how many spaces are available for workers to buy monthly? Has that fluctuated between 2 years ago, between this year? I really think the ridership part of that, maybe there's a lot of people that are in their 20s that are now using the lot and they like to walk versus someone that are more seniors that will use the shuttle. So I think it's really hard to judge usage of the shuttle on that, and probably the same thing with the Coda lot. And when the weather gets worse, more people are going to use the shuttle because they're not going to want to walk in the rain. Or when daylight savings ends, they're going to want to use the shuttle when they get off work. So I think there's a lot of factors that it's hard to judge that it's just maybe because the recession or something. I think there's so many factors it's hard to judge versus the other routes that we look at on this form. So I sometimes wonder why we look at the Carrillo lot shuttle ridership as either it should be dropped or not dropped. That's just my opinion on that. But otherwise, I think the city in general, our ridership looks very good. And that's all I have to say.
Mr. Chair? Well,
Yes, Committee Member Pritchett.
maybe when we get our next packet of MTD reports, staff can look at their other set of data on car lot, right? Browning, don't you have figures on every lot? And we can test that question that Keith brings up.
Actually, that was what I was going to suggest, that I'll get together with the downtown parking staff and see if we can get some occupancy numbers, or at least probably don't have occupancy numbers, but we have the number of permits we have sold in the Creo lot, and we can correlate that to the usage.
Right. And that's only by permit, right?
Yes.
Okay. I peruse the parking committee packages, and I'm always interested in the Granada garage trends. So I know you've got scads of data, nice charts.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know, like, say, 3 years ago, pre-recession, and now if there's less people buying permits for those parking lots.
Yeah, we'll probably be able to give you number of permits sold, for the lots, but we won't have occupancy numbers because we don't have the revenue control equipment on the Creo lot like we have in the other downtown parking lots where they're paid on an hourly basis. But we'll see what we can bring to the committee at the next time we present the reports and see, maybe do a little comparison. I'll also ask MTD if they can do a similar chart, doing the same trend over the last 5 or so years, so we can see how the Creo commuter lot has been trending. My recollection is it's pretty constant. These are about the numbers we have been seeing, probably for the last 5 or 6 years, and it's up and down, based on a lot on the weather too. And sometimes people feel I can walk a little bit faster than I can take the shuttle, especially if they're running a little bit late. They'll hoof it.
Thank you, Browning. Since I guess a full privilege to add one last comment. I am interested to, I'm going to echo Committee Member Pritchett's comments about the dearth of information, so much information that's presented, and that it might actually be more helpful for us to have information presented quarterly, or even spend more time annually and assess not just trends but also strategies related. We have a listing of public information and outreach or marketing for the shuttle, but it'd be interesting to see what areas are receiving more and less emphasis in the coming years. So I'd like to, since there's no action item there, I'd like to move on to our next item, which is the Streets Fiscal Year 2012 Capital Improvement Program Budget Report. Thank you, John Wyzak, for coming and presenting to us.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is John Owasiak, Principal Civil Engineer for the Public Works Department and the Streets Capital Manager. I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about the draft Streets Capital Improvement Program Fiscal Year 12 budget. And just wanted to let you know that staff has started earlier this year than last year in the budget preparation. So it seems like we've only been here, or I've only been here a few months ago, and that's probably true. And we've got a good start on this next fiscal year 12 budget. One of the things that made it easier for us too is that the state of the economy and our projected revenues and revenue sources, and they're very similar to what has occurred this last year. And so it really was the budget last year was a starting point for looking at how to budget this year. Today's work session, I'll get into an overview, a brief overview, and then talk about the program funding priority categories and the prioritization matrix. When staff was here last month at the September 23rd meeting, there was the introduction of the prioritization matrix, and it was a result of our meetings that we had last fiscal year with the approval of the last fiscal year budget, where there were comments from both the TCC and the Planning Commission regarding ranking and then being a quantitative analysis on ranking. And so as a result, staff developed a prioritization matrix, which was introduced to you last month. And I'd like to elaborate on that and let you know the outcome of some of the results of that exercise. And so we also have today for you an updated draft, the proposed Streets Capital Fiscal Year 12 budget. And then I'd like to talk about next steps from as a result of the budget process moving forward. So as a reiteration, the work session purpose here today is to obtain the TCC and public review and comment on the draft budget for Streets Capital Improvement Program, Fiscal Year 12. And it stems from the circulation element. There is a circulation element requirement that prior to the annual adoption of the capital improvement program, public works sessions be held with actually the Planning Commission, and that's upcoming. It's one of the next steps. And the City Council ultimately to develop the project priorities for funding. And since the Transportation Circulation Committee was formed subsequent to the circulation element, we have found it prudent to come to the TCC to get your input and feedback, and it's been very valuable in the past and has been, we look forward to for your comments in the future, today and in the future. So as an overview, we have limited funding available. Again, I mentioned that the state of the economy is what it is, and that revenue sources and projections are limited. And so we still have competing priorities, and so we embrace the comments on the prioritization and to quantify some of that. So there's the recognition of limited funding and competing priorities. But one of the underlying messages that we're saying is as staff is that we have a very high focus on the maintenance of the street infrastructure. It's one of our highest priorities. And that continues to be the song that we're singing in this budget. The city does a 6-year capital improvement report, and that is typically done every 2 years. However, for the last couple years, and even in this year, we're doing yet another draft 6-year capital improvement report, and that's been included in your distribution packet. And we're pleased to have that available for you at this point in time. Typically, it's usually later in the process that gets developed. But again, as staff was preparing earlier for this budget, it became very useful information for us and for us to share with you. So you could see what we anticipate to fund, and then the needs in the community of unfunded needs as well. And those funded and unfunded projects are shown on that 6-year capital improvement report. Again, staff is anticipating that it'll be a 1-year budget. That's what we're prepared for due to, again, the state of the economy and revenue projections. And that one of the things that's different than the last few years is that typically we go to the Planning Commission at the same time as we go to the TCC, because the entire 6-year CIP, Capital Improvement Program, will be going to the Planning Commission. We've had the determination that we'll make the Planning Commission presentation at that time for Streets Capital as well as the balance of the 6-year city capital improvement program. So it's Streets Capital isn't going separately, it's actually going concurrently with the city's 6-year CIP. And then subsequent to that, there'll be the Finance Committee review, and then ultimately City Council in the spring of 2011 will be reviewing and approving the proposed budgets, or will be commenting on the proposed budgets and ultimately approving a budget. So I'd like to get into our funding sources. Our Measure A, which was passed in November 2008, secures a 30-year measure revenue stream. It's a significant revenue stream to the city and the Streets Capital program. And so I'm pleased that we have that as from this point forward for many years. Another significant revenue stream for the city is the utility users tax, which is a significant component of our funding source. And then another significant component is the grant funds. And we have some good news to report on our recent grant that we received, and I'll save that for Brownie to announce. And then I did want to give you some information on budgeted projects or grant funds that we'll be receiving for the Highway Bridge Program, for our bridge replacement program. So I'll elaborate on that a little bit in a minute. You've seen this slide before. We've, in the last 3 years, staff has utilized this information to help us as a tool for priority categories to which we assist us in making recommendations for projects to fund. And just to reiterate that, and I call it the qualitative analysis. And I mentioned that the matrix is now the quantitative analysis. And again, 2 tools that we use to help us make recommendations for budget budgeted projects proposed to fund. And so projects that have a high significant consequences if not constructed would be a high priority. One of the examples I would use is our pavement maintenance. If we let our pavement deteriorate to a significant portion, it would cost us exponentially more to repair them later than to do timely repair. So second bullet, generally maintaining existing infrastructure before funding new improvements is a priority. So basically maintaining what we have is going to be a high priority. And then a high priority to maximize leveraging through grants, self-explanatory. And again, it's a high priority to fund street safety projects. Safety is inherent in all of our public works projects, and we do have emphasis on safety projects as well. And then city policy improvements are also important. So projects like our sidewalk infill program are important to us. We had some discussion on that last year, and we didn't include some sidewalk infill funding last year just simply because we didn't have enough money to go around for that recommendation. And I'm sad to report that that's the same recommendation that we're having this year because, again, we have the same, approximately the same amount of projected revenues this year as last year.
John, if I could interrupt you real quickly, just as an informational item, could you mention a couple of the street safety projects that would be high priority? Just a few examples.
Let's see. Intersection improvement projects would be high priorities for safety. Pedestrian refuge islands would be, again, ones that we will always look for ways to fund, especially the ones that are cost effective that we can do with, say, like striping and that don't involve a large capital cost. And signage type of projects, school zone safety projects, those will always be on our radar. And so we have ways to fund those types of smaller cost projects, but of course the bigger capital costs, they go on our list as bigger line items, and many of them are shown on your 6-year packet as currently unfunded, but I believe if you get into the text of some of those projects, you'll recognize that there are safety components in many of those projects.
Thank you.
This is a slide of what you saw generally last month with the new prioritization matrix. And so again, it's in response to the TCC and the Planning Commission, and this is the quantitative ranking criteria. And last month, there were some comments from the TCC, and staff has incorporated those comments and actually made the changes that were recommended by the committee. And so they're shown in yellow here on the slide, and one of them was the leverage category, where the multiplier was increased to a 2, and the city policy we had also increased the points associated with that. But I'd like to elaborate on this for you, please, and for the public, which is to give you, the definition or a little more explanation of the 5 categories. With exposure, it's the degree of liability to the city due to the regulatory requirements and or safety concerns. So we're always concerned about liability. The second category, the cost of deferral. And it's the amount of additional funding relative to inflation required due to existing or anticipated maintenance costs if the project is delayed, or the extent to which a project scope of work increases due to the deferral of the project. So there's recognition that when you delay a project that there's costs involved, and so the points are associated with the levels of the delay. Project delivery, something that wasn't in the prior criteria, which is that if projects are easy to deliver, they would receive a higher point rating. So the anticipated duration of the review process sometimes is a significant component of that, and it may involve environmental or community concerns or the number of agency approvals required. So those are all factors that come into project delivery. With leverage, this category ranks projects based on the percentage of non-city or grant funds available. And then with city policy, this category ranks projects based on the specificity of council action or direction towards a project or studies or any of the reports associated with projects. So this next slide are the results of the quantitative analysis. When we applied the criteria to the list of projects in the 6-year capital improvement program, these projects rank the highest, beginning from the top slide down. And so the ones that are highlighted in yellow are actually the ones that coincide with what we are proposing for funding. And again, using the quantitative analysis, it's not an absolute. We still use the qualitative analysis, and we still use our judgment and information that we receive from the boards and commissions and the finance committee and the general public, and our wisdom to recommend projects for funding. And so this was a pretty good check for us to see how the quantitative analysis applied to what we were recommending for funding.
So do you mean the sequence in this table is the results of your applying the criteria?
That
Off
is
the bottom?
correct,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Pritchett. This is the results of applying the criteria, the quantitative criteria, and so I might add, though, the top project is an RDA-funded project, and so it's not per se part of the Streets Capital Improvement Program, but I anticipate that will be funded actually in fiscal year 12 by the RDA. So that is a separate budget aside from the Streets Capital. However, because it is a downtown sidewalk repair project, we've included it on this list for your information. And so the top multiple of projects that are in yellow, those are anticipated to be funded projects. And then there are a few other projects on the list that we would recommend for funding, like the sidewalk access ramp project. We need to meet the American with Disabilities Act requirements, and we strongly recommend that we continue to provide access ramp improvements in the city. And then the Lower West Downtown lighting project, that is a project that is currently funded by the RDA for Phase 1, and we anticipate that it will be funded for Phase 2 next year. And so another project is the intersection improvements, traffic safety capacity, and annual project. That too is being recommended. And then with drainage, Lower Mission Creek, there is, with the multitude of bridge replacement projects and grant funding that we will be receiving for those projects, there's a need for staff time and associated work to coincide with the U.S. Army Corps, Lower Mission Creek project, and the contractual obligations that we have with the county flood control and the relationships that we have to continue working on the Lower Mission Creek improvement projects. And so that's the reason that project too is being recommended for funding. And the list continues. That first slide included some of the funded projects, and the second slide is the balance of the projects that are in the 6-year CIP and how the ranking pertained to those projects too. So there's 2 pages of list of projects. So the former being including the top ranked, and these are the bottom half ranked projects. Did that?
Could I interrupt John real quickly with a question? Yes, our liaison, Deborah Schwartz.
Do you want to?
Thanks, Ms. Kowalski. So back to the top-ranked portion of the slide with the yellow highlighted items, I just wanted to understand. Yes, thank you. I just wanted to understand if there was a reason why these top 15 projects are not grouped at the top since they've been prioritized as the most critical. Why do we have others kind of sequenced in with the yellow prioritized ones? Am I missing something in the?
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Chair France, and in response to the question, the ranking of the criteria is applied to all the projects, and so every project received a numerical quantitative number, and so that is how those projects ranked when the criteria was applied. And so when we were looking at recommending projects for funding, we used this as one of the tools to make recommendations, and it became very evident that what we needed to recommend for funding was in the top ranked projects. And then it became that there were a number of projects that were very close in ranking for remaining funds. So we looked at what projects we could fund and how much money we had. So it's a zero-sum game where we only have a limited amount of money. And so when it became down to the lower end, we started using the qualitative criteria and other factors, such as, the example I gave you at the access ramps is that we're mandated to have a access ramp replacement or maintenance program. And so we felt that we need to fund that, and we chose that ahead of, say, intersection of State and Alomar. And so there are some tough choices that staff have to make when looking at a limited amount of funding and recognizing that there are higher priority projects above that. So does that okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, perhaps I need to rephrase my question. Again, what I heard was, so reconfirm if you would for me, the projects that are highlighted in yellow through the kind of sifting and sorting process that you've described have now been ranked as of the highest priority on this mapping. They have not.
Let me try this.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm not then sure why they're highlighted in yellow if they're not the priority. Okay.
Well, committee members, if you recall last month, Jessica presented the criteria. We went over that with you, how we wanted to evaluate the projects to recommend for funding. What this slide is showing the committee is the outcome of that, how all the projects that we had submitted to be considered for funding in the capital improvement program, applying that criteria, how they fell out. So from the top all the way down to the least one using the criteria, number 1 all the way down to number 100. That's all this is showing you in terms of that. That's why you'll see the Alomar State and the federal safety route to school is not being recommended for funding. All we're trying to do is show you how the ranking worked out in terms of the program. What John did by highlighting the projects, just to give you an idea, even though there's some projects in here that didn't rank as high, they still rank pretty high, and we have a need to fund those, like the traffic safety and capacity improvement, the annual program. That's the money Drew Van Hingel and her staff uses to do operational improvements in the city at various intersections and other locations in the city. That's all it's doing. It's not that we didn't want to put those 4 yellow ones up atop because it's going to be misleading to the committee. We didn't want to let you know just how everything shook out.
Okay. While we're on this informational point, John, if you could clarify, is there like a bottom? Is one of these lines like a bold line in which the funding gets cut off, or funding year 2012 does not apply?
Chair Franz, this is the projects that are highlighted in yellow correspond to the projects that staff is recommending for funding.
Okay.
So that's different than how the prioritization and the list, the order in which they appear.
Okay, so that makes clear then the questioning that yellow means funding and
2012.
for 2012. Obviously, yeah.
So this might help is that this next slide shows the projects that we are recommending for funding. And so these are the projects that are yellow on the previous slide. So, and this may look familiar to you because it is not identical, but it's very, very similar to what was approved as the streets capital budget for fiscal year 11. Again, one of the reasons is that we're using the assumption that the revenues that are coming in, the sales tax revenues and the UUT, the Measure A revenues are similar or comparable to what we've experienced this last year, and that is the projections that we have. And so the only 2 differences in projects between last year's approved fiscal year 11 budget and the proposed fiscal year 12 budget is that the Coda Bridge project, street replacement project, last year we had Mason Bridge, and so we bank monies for the bridge replacement projects. We have enough money now for Mason. We do need to continue to bank for Coda. And the other project that is a new project this year from last year is the corrugated metal pipe repair and maintenance. That is our metal drainage pipes that are in our infrastructure, our drainage infrastructure. We don't have a budget to maintain them. Last year we had 2 major blowouts that we had to dip into pavement maintenance monies to repair. And so we recognize that in our aging drainage system that we need to do a inventory and analysis of our metal drainage pipes. They were, a lot of our drainage system was installed as when the city grew significantly in the late 50s and early 60s, and a lot of development happened at that time. A lot of metal pipe went in the ground as drainage pipe. We now have concrete pipe as our city standard. That lasts a significantly longer time. The metal pipes corrode, and we're anticipating to have some more failures. We would like to address them proactively rather than reactively, and so we're setting up a program for culvert drainage pipe maintenance. The rest of the projects, and I could go through them too, which are the same as the approved budget last year. So if the committee would like, or I could skip over them or be brief with them if you like, we could walk through the list of the projects that are proposed for funding. So I could start with Bridge Preventative Maintenance Program. This was a relatively new program. We had done a consultant inventory and study of all the city's bridges. There's approximately 60 city bridges, and we need to do some preventative maintenance. Fortunately, that report has revealed that no real high significant costs, no multi-million-dollar costs were identified in that program. However, there still is a need to do bridge maintenance. The 101 operational improvements, as you know, that's an ongoing four-year project, and these funds are for the staff time and coordination required for the Caltrans work. They terminate at our city limits, and there's coordination required to do that effort. Sidewalk maintenance continues to be one of our high priorities to maintain our sidewalks. We have raised and uplifted sidewalk issues in the city. That's a significant issue for us, and we continue to want to fund that. Our streets infrastructure management, that is monies that are utilized for the survey work necessary in the city. We have annual monitoring on many roads in the city and areas in the city, like the Conejo slide area and retaining walls that are subject to movement and the like. And so those, plus our real property functions, our management of our easements and roadways, right-of-ways, and also for project scoping for potential grant funds or projects that we would be interested in pursuing. So those are funds that are necessary to continue our management of the right-of-way. Drainage system maintenance, ongoing program for maintenance of our drainage infrastructure, and that is in addition to what I just described as a specific component of the drainage system being the corrugated metal pipe. Pavement maintenance program, again, a significant need in the city to maintain our streets with our slurry seal program, chip seal program, or cape seal program, etc. Traffic signal maintenance, again, ongoing need to maintain our traffic signal system. I mentioned the CODA and the corrugated pipe. And those are the maintaining our infrastructure projects. Our infrastructure improvement projects are the access ramps, and I spoke to that. And then again, I spoke to the Lower Mission Creek work that is ongoing with coordination with the U.S. Army Corps and the county and our bridge program projects. A safety upgrade project, again, is the traffic signal operational upgrades, and we look for opportunities to make improvements to signalization and areas of need. And so the bottom line figures here are the totals of the UUT Measure A funds and total of discretionary funds that are recognized as city discretionary funds, where we choose how to use them in the Streets Capital Program. And again, these projections total $1.9 million, and that was the figure that was adopted last year in fiscal year 11, or very close to it. In addition to the city funds, there are dedicated funds, generally grant funds or funds outside of city resources. And so for a pavement maintenance program, we have Proposition 42 funds. Proposition 42 funds are related to our gas tax funds from the state, and they can only be used for pavement maintenance or drainage, emergencies and drainage for maintaining drainage in the right-of-ways. And so we program those funds for pavement maintenance. And also, we get by formula a local surface transportation program annual amount of approximately $338,000 a year, and we apply that to our pavement. It's in the streets and roads category of the funding, and so we do have some discretion over how to use that, but we choose to use it in pavement maintenance because we do have an annual pavement maintenance program, and if we dissected these funds into different areas, that creates monitoring and reporting issues that could create extra work for staff. So it's more efficient for us to keep these funds into one annual recurring program. Again, mentioning that Coda Street is one of our bridge programs on the city-funded list, and these funds under a bridge grant, it's the Highway Bridge Program grant. These are for right-of-way phase funds, right-of-way acquisition for easements and property associated with the bridge replacement program. So in fiscal year 12, we anticipate getting these funds, $885,000 for the Coda Street Bridge Replacement Project. Similarly, with Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project, we anticipate getting $5 million worth of right-of-way funding. There are a couple property acquisitions, and they're expensive down in Lower State Street, and so there will also be easements and the like. And the good news for Mason Street is that these funds are, there's no city match. There's actually, this is 100% grant. So that helped us out a lot in our big scheme of banking and programming bridge fund money. And as well with Chapala Yananali, these funds, $329,000, are anticipated bridge grant funds, again for the right-of-way phase of the project. The Coda, Mason, and Chapala are all in the preliminary design stage. So as you can see, there, these totals of Proposition 42, LSTP, and bridge grants totaling $7.3 million by far exceed our city funds. So it's an extremely important component of our streets capital program. And then the TDA funds for bicycle improvements, that's I believe an annual Browning. That's correct, TDA?
That's correct. That money can only be used for bicycle or pedestrian improvements.
Right. And so the total there is, with all the grant and dedicated funding sources that are more or less project specific, a total of the $7.4 million. When added to the 1.9 of city funds, our program total becomes $9.3 million for this year. So next steps in the budget process are, as I mentioned before, that the 6-year Streets Capital Improvement Program will be going to the Planning Commission, and the Streets Capital will be a component of that work session with the Planning Commission. And then in the spring, we would be going to the Finance Committee. Staff would be going to the Finance Committee with the CIP, and then ultimately it'd go to budget review. And historically, every year, Council adopts our budget. So in summary, we've got significant reductions in our program revenues as compared to previous years. Not last year, but previous years. An example of that, fiscal year 10, we've had a streets capital city budget of approximately $3.3 million, and even more in prior years. But last year, we had a $1.9 million streets capital budget adopted, and we're proposing another one, similar, comparable to last year. And so our program projects recommended, we believe, coincide with that program prioritization and the ranking criteria that we have shared with you. So with that, I take any questions or comments that you may have, and we look forward to the future discussions.
Mr. Chair, before you do that, when John started his presentation, he indicated I was going to give you some good news that we received. Last week, we received a letter from the state of California, Caltrans, advising us that we received the Safe Route to School grant in the tune of $218,000 that we're going to be using for a safety project over by La Cumbre Junior High School on Modoc and Portezuelo. And the benefit of that is it's going to free up the like amount of money that we can use for another capital project that we identified. And probably Drew and I will be talking with staff and identify what that project is. But we have a couple of ideas where we want to use it, a couple of priority projects that we've been trying to find funding for a couple of years.
That's absolutely great news. I saw that item on the CIP, and it's something that's been a concern of the Coomberra Junior High for a long time. So, great. So I'd like to open up first, I think, for this item for comments by our members of the public. So if our liaison, Deborah Schwartz, Planning Commissioner.
Probably less so as a question, more as a point of suggestion to the committee and perhaps. Thank you, Mr. Wasiak. I assumed it was on. Probably less directed to you as a question and more as a suggestion for both you and Mr. Owasiak as you prepare to come to the commission and the council. Some of these transportation projects are based on policy, city policy, and values that have been really established for some time as core to the city. However, in listening to the recent Plan Santa Barbara hearings by the council and paying close attention to some concerns and some skepticism, I would reference it, by some of the council members as to the merits of some of the transportation measures that I know your committee has embraced and recommended. I'm going to suggest to the extent possible that when this is brought to the commission and even more importantly the council, that some of the funding associated with projects, specifically in the area of bike facilities associated with the bicycle master plan, that if the measures have been formulated based on, I'll refer to it as best practices from other regions, either in California or outside, that that be communicated to the other decision-making bodies, because I think there are some council members in particular who want to understand, and perhaps their confidence will be bolstered in hearing that Santa Barbara is not the first to consider and adopt some of these multimodal measures or projects. So with funding being particularly scarce during this time, I think it could assist everyone who's passionate and very much a believer in moving some of these initiatives and measures forward to convey that to other decision-making bodies who may not understand what the staff department and also your committee has undertaken in thoroughly researching the need for some of these measures and that they are based on measures that have been tried in other cities and have been very successful in other cities, and that is the basis for bringing them to Santa Barbara and hopefully having the community embrace them and them being worthy of a financial investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Planning Commissioner Schwartz. I'd like to start comments again, perhaps from one side of the dais to the other, unless we'd like to actually. Committee member Blackerby, you seem to have a comment. If you want to start, or Keith Kaufman-Gray.
Oh, not a whole lot. I mean, I just want to thank the staff for making those changes for the project matrix that we suggested in September, and I think this is having going through this in the past, having this matrix really helps prioritize the projects. And it makes it very objective instead of just, one person saying, oh, I like this one better than the other one. It kind of takes that out of the equation. And I think it showed that it really works with our circulation element and how they rank pretty much up to the top. The yellow showed that, by ranking them, that's pretty much what the city was planning to fund in fiscal year 12. So I think it proves that it does work. The other thing is, it's too bad the public can't see all the work that was done for the 6-year capital improvement project, Exhibit D, that was given to all the committee members. Every project that you saw listed up there, they did a separate sheet for each project, and it shows the timeline when they might be funded. I mean, it's very subjective. It's all going to probably change, but at least it's a wonderful document that each project is listed. And it shows what needs to be done and then the approximate time that the city thinks they might be able to fund that project. And I don't remember ever seeing anything like this. It was usually just some words on a paper saying this is the project. but you actually have photos of each project that was listed, that whole long sheet, describing what needs to be done. And I think it's a great basis for going forward over these next 6 years. So I want to thank staff for doing that. I mean, that is a lot of work to do that, and I'm sure it's going to be used a lot over the next few years. As far as the actual projects picked out for 12, I think with our limited funding, like I said, I don't know when I said it last, but I said it before, is as a city, I guess we should just be thankful that we have the Measure A and all these other grants to do the amount of funding that we can do, even though it's not nearly what we used to do in the past. But at least we have this to keep our streets going and do some of these other multimodal projects that we'd like to get done. So that's really all I have to say, and I just want to thank staff again for doing as much work as they did over this last few weeks since our last meeting.
Thank you, Committee Member Kaufman-Gray. Committee Member Blackerby.
Thank you. One of my questions was going to be, didn't we get Savers to Schools money? That's wonderful, and that is a scary place over there by Portesuelo, so I know people will definitely be thankful for that. I'm always interested to find out, I think I asked last time we did this, when we had a sidewalk improvement thing in there, how much sidewalk do you get for X amount of dollars? I have the same question about one of the proposed items, sidewalk access ramps, and obviously we have to get into compliance as much as possible. For $50,000, which seems like no money at all, how many ramps or what does that get you? How far do we get?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Blackerby, we're just putting out a project for bid, and it's got 6 ramps. Some of them are depending on site conditions and other factors, but generally speaking, that project is probably estimated at about 75,000-ish, something like that, something in that ballpark.
Well, we had a 60,000 plus or minus community development block grant money that was going towards it, so that gives you a magnitude. So
So this
$10,000,
basically gets you like
$15,000 a ramp.
an intersection.
But what we
maybe.
plan to do with this is either look for, use that as match money for other monies that may become available. Plus, we would, at a minimum, be banking the monies to make a larger project. We typically try and get a ramp project to be in the $100,000 range to have the bang for the buck, so we can get cost effectiveness out of the project. And so we were fortunate this last year to have the stimulus funds, the ARA funds, where we did a significant amount of ramp improvements. I don't remember the numbers, but it was substantial. And so the ramp program got a real strong boost in the arm for the stimulus monies that were applied to it.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about just a couple of days ago was, we apply every year for community development block grant money, CDBG funds. We get roughly $50,000 to $60,000. So in the future, at least for the next few years, take that money and put that with the city monies, so we can get a better bang for our buck when we go out to get. If we have $100,000, we'll get more favorable bidding climate versus only having $50,000.
Need money to make money. And my other question was on the bicycle improvements, the $52,000. What are there? And maybe this is obvious, but it's not super apparent to me what that goes to. What again? How much bicycle improvement do you get on 52,000? And are there specific? Do we have a? If it's based on, we just go down the row and what's in the 6-year plan through all the bicycle improvements, then maybe that's it. But I was just wondering what projects that goes towards.
Well, that's the current fiscal year's, actually, it's TDA money, Transportation Development Act money, and we have banked money over a couple of years, so we have roughly $150,000 in change in the bank. Mm-hmm. We'll apply this money with that, and I'll be sitting down with staff. We're looking at either doing a sidewalk project or doing a bike project. There's one bike project we applied for a grant that we didn't get, so we're going to sit down and see what is the priority between the two projects. So $52,000 doesn't get us a whole lot of bike unless we're just going to put in our annual bike program where we install hitching posts and do all that. But we have money still from another grant that we're going to be using for that. So we're going to see if we can use this for a capital project.
Okay. And then also on the bike question, I know it's been talked about before, but I forget where it is, or maybe it's nowhere, as far as change, and maybe it's just striping and it's not technically a capital improvement, but the Bath and Castillo and on the other side of Mission, where they turn back to two ways. We had discussed at one point continuing the one way and adding a class 2 lane. Is that no longer popular?
That was part of the Las Casitas Mission, Cottage Hospital circulation option. That was something that came up out of that. Right now, staff is not really doing anything with that. Cottage Hospital did have some concerns with regards to Castillo Street because they're building a new hospital, and the end of Castillo Street, which the city vacated, is the front entrance to their hospital, and the proposal would be basically taking cars away rather than bring it to the hospital. So we are focusing our efforts with regards to that. And it's a good segue that we're going to council on November 16th to award contract to the design firm IBI to start working on the project study report for the access to Cottage Hospital, the actual roadway improvements, the off 101
hook ramp,
and the hook ramp and all that. The other ones that you were talking about, that's something that still out there. It's still in the document that was submitted, but we're not really working on that right now. We're going to focus our efforts on the highway.
Yeah. I guess that's how it goes. Okay, thank you. I think that's everything.
Great. Thank you, Committee Member Blackerby. I'll start my comments actually just quickly to follow up on that point, Browning. At what point does an item, is it validated to break it apart from a larger project? For example, at public input about, and this has come up a couple of times, specifically about Bath and Castillo, which are, some of the leading west side bike paths extending once past Mission. What does it take for that project to split away from the Las Positas and the Cottage Hospital 101 access in order to become its own project?
Well, for us to pursue a project similar to that, we would need stakeholders' support. So obviously, the people that we have impacted by those changes that either have residents or businesses in the area, that front that, as well as the users of Cottage Hospital. That would be a big change. So when we go to council in a few weeks and present the circulations options report, that's in the report. Their council is going to have an opportunity to review it, and they might very well say, yeah, go ahead and pursue it, or they might say, don't even think about it. So we have to get direction from the policymakers as well as make sure we have stakeholder support before we move forward with a project. We're changing the character of a roadway.
All right. I'd like to start off after that by echoing the comments from Planning Commissioner Schwartz. It is important to note that to continue to reiterate the purpose of the circulation element is to allow for an equality of modes, so that we have a city where you have easy access not just to driving but to bicycling and walking in a way that's safe and convenient. And as a brief editorial, since World War II, we, as in this nation, have invested heavily in our roadway system, in the interstate highway system, and our roadway system to complement. And then, of course, in the parking system to complement that. And we heavily subsidize the most expensive form of surface transportation. We, in the last 2 years, have had significant budget constraints as due to the recession. And it's important just to think conceptually about this, that the most expensive transportation system, roadway or surface transportation system, is driving in individual vehicles. They're expensive to the users, and they're expensive to the cities, the states, and the nation to maintain. There are certainly, I would argue, benefits for our citizens and for a municipality down the road to make investments in walkable and bikeable routes, complements to our public transit. The point being, when I look at this budget, I am disappointed in two things really. One is that in the matrix, the prioritization matrix, and I know we discussed this at the last meeting, and nevertheless, the city policy, each area has a multiplier, and obviously exposure to lawsuits, liability, the ability to deliver a project, all have exposure multiplier or a multiplier of 3. Now, city policy has a multiplier of 1. We did increase the overall points attributed to a policy that or a project that is clearly very much in keeping and forwarding city policy towards our circulation element of equality of modes. However, that still ranks lower than perhaps other projects, which to me is somewhat disappointing. It is important to note that of the last few years, when you look at other cities, you're seeing walking routes, so in other words, sidewalk infill and bikeways multiplying almost exponentially throughout major U.S. cities. And look at Minneapolis, which is now the country's most bikeable city. There's significant investment, and it is it's important to note that the city of Santa Barbara is not experimenting with new programs and leading, but in some ways we're actually lagging in terms of multimodal program development and modifications that improve the access to all users on our roadways. But not to get too jargony, John, I'm going to grill you for a second, and I hope this is not too off the rails, but when I look at the multiple funding sources for asphalt repaving, it's really of note because in the two different budgets we have our discretionary funds. By far the largest item, by almost fivefold, is the pavement maintenance program, and then of course our Measure A budget, and then separately we have the Prop 42, the gas tax, at $800,000, and then what does the LSTP stand for again?
A Local Surface Transportation Program.
Great, which is $338,000, and again is not committed to resurfacing of the roads that could be used for any transportation improvements or maintenance, correct?
I'm not sure every transportation payments, but it has to be public improvements in the public right-of-way associated with the roads and related public right-of-way activity. So, for example, it can be used for alternative transportation, I don't believe.
It could be used for bikes or pedestrian improvements. We could use it for sidewalks, for example, if the council wanted to do that.
But currently, and I understand, trust me, I have to do some grant reporting myself. Using that funding for other projects does make it more complex, and I understand now it's being used for repaving.
Correct.
For the pavement maintenance program. Now, I want to be very respectful for the hard work that goes into maintaining a system. I know it's broken out into different areas, and is it like some percentile, like 70% we have to maintain the level of quality of paving?
I'd be happy to elaborate on that a little bit if you like.
If you could actually,
Sure.
Because it's the most significant budget item, it'd be great if we knew just a little bit more of the thinking behind it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to explain that a little bit better, because it's near and dear to my heart, because it is one of the most expensive asset that we have to maintain. And so let me start out by saying that we have historically the city has monitored our road pavement maintenance, and way back when Measure D was first approved, there was the recognition that our pavement rating system in the city at that time, 21 years ago, the pavement condition was, I believe it was 59 out of 100. So 100 being brand new asphalt, 0 being deteriorated, basically dirt. And so the roads were in very bad condition and needed significant dollars. And then at that time, because of Measure D, millions and millions and millions of dollars were budgeted and utilized. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the city budgets then consisted of approximately $6 million. I've seen a record of $6+ million being applied to the roads. In today's dollars, we're probably talking about $12, $15 million. So that gives you an idea of what would happen if our roads dilapidated to the point where it would cost a significant amount to bring them back up to a state of good repair. Excuse me. And so the city developed a practice of maintaining our roads at approximately a 70 pavement condition index. 70 being above that is good or very good. Below that is areas of concern. So when the economy was good and we could budget more monies for roads, we were slurrying every street in the city as a preventative maintenance practice, and because the city is comprised of 7 pavement zones, and we were able to do 1 pavement zone a year and slurry every street in the city to maintain those quality of roads that we bumped up from 59. We got it as high as 75 when budgets were good. I can tell you that because the pavement maintenance need right now is an annual need of $4.7 million, that's what we would need to budget from this day forward to maintain a pavement condition index of 70. Our 75 a few years ago has now dropped down to a 68. And now, in the last 3 or 4 years, actually 5 years, we budgeted approximately $2.3 million of city funds towards pavement maintenance. That's below the need. And so our pavement condition index is declining. And so this budget that we're showing you today reflects that we're not near meeting the need of the pavement. This year's budget is $1.9 million for pavement maintenance, not even half of the need of what's required to maintain a pavement condition index of 70. And so I think the point I'm making here is that because money is so tight, we're not even meeting the goal and the need of the pavement maintenance. Even though it's the highest line item in the budget today, it's well below what is established as the goal and the need for the city. So it's an example of how tight these budgets are. We don't want to pump all the money into pavement maintenance. We wouldn't be able to fund anything else. So by having this dispersal and prioritization in everything, all these other categories that are important to us, that we've been able to disseminate the available money. And we used to use the term share the pain. We would put monies towards different programs and projects and areas of concern so that we could disperse the money in a reasonable fashion or in accordance with what the goals and the prioritizations that we have developed. And so that's the big challenge in pavement maintenance, is that you pay now or you pay more later, and there'll be a day when not too far that we will have to address this in a more serious level, because we can't continue to have that payment level drop off to the point where it will cost us significantly more later. But those days are coming.
Are there any informational questions? And I appreciate you taking a moment to go into more depth.
Yeah.
Committee member Blackerby.
Yeah. For the I would call them extra, the ARA funds that came in this year, of just projects that I've just noticed around towns, because I see the RS sign, of course, at Salinas and Upper De La Vina, that those were ARA projects. I'm wondering, did that help us just kind of catch up, or did that help us sort of get ahead in any way on the normal plans?
Thank you for the question. That's a very good point, is that the city received, for pavement, $2.4 million last year of ARA funds that we applied directly into the roads, into pavement. So with that 2.4 combined with our 1.9, we were still below our goal of maintaining, of the 4.7 that is the need in the city. So while that was a strong shot in the arm, it didn't even get us to breaking even on the goal. So, of what would be required annually to keep our roads at a good or very good condition. And I know that there are many roads in our city that do look good, and we've had some of this discussion in last year and past years, where many of our roads are good, and that's one of the keys to pavement maintenance, is to keep those good roads good, because we're only paying 44 cents a square foot to slurry a road versus probably $3.50 a square foot to overlay it, like what we did with the ARA funds on Upper State Street and Upper De La Vina. So we would use those practices when we believe it's cost effective to do that. But what are the keys of pavement maintenance is to continue to maintain roads while they're in a good condition. And that's when you become cost effective.
Great. Keith Kaufman-Gray, did you have a comment?
Is there a way to bring up the slide of your rankings of the street CIP program that had the yellow? Exhibit C. Yeah, that's it. Okay. I think it's important to look at the dollar amount off to the right. Isn't it says remaining project cost or estimated project cost if not funded. And I think that $28 million figure I think is very important why we do the maintenance of our roads, because that would be the cost as I understand it if we didn't keep them maintained. Is that correct?
Basically, yes. That's a deferred cost right there that we would, if we wanted to get our roads into the state of good repair as per our goals, then we would need to pump in $28 million to do that.
Okay. So if we didn't do this, I mean, that probably go up then? Or?
By not funding at the recommended funded level of $4.7 million, that number will grow annually.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
So to round up my comments, and I really appreciate going into more detail about the level of importance of the asphalt repaving and the roadway maintenance. That said, what would it take to peel out $300,000 from that to fund the sidewalk infill? What would that look like?
Sheriff Rance, that is robbing Peter to pay Paul, I guess, is one way to describe it. It could be done. That infill is one of the things that we have recognized as an important goal, but it certainly isn't as high in the prioritization in our criteria. I think that's the best way that I can describe it, is that we recognize it as a high priority, but staff has the responsibility of making the best recommendations that we can based with the monies that we have. And so that's one of the determinations that we have made at the staff level. And I just wanted to point out that it's just not me and Browning at the table. We have several other managers in the Streets Capital program that we associate and deal with and talk to about these things. And so we also are trying to be responsive to the public and to the taxpayers. And we also appreciate all the direction we receive from the boards and commissions. And so it was pretty clear to us in past presentations that maintaining our infrastructure is one of the highest priorities. And infill is an improvement. And so one of the points we're making with the boards and commissions and with council and the finance committee is that we really need to maintain what we have before we start, before we continue on the past practice of adding more to the inventory to maintain. And so that's one of the struggles that we have as staff in bringing you these recommendations. We arm wrestle all the time with staff over how much money goes where or in our recommendations, but we're trying to find the balance between all the needs and all the direction and the input that we receive. And so this is the result of those efforts.
Yeah. And I very much appreciate that, and fulfilling my role as part of that balance. I just want to express, as far as certainly some programs, if I'm going to use the specific example of the sidewalk infill program, that's a matter where we've identified a need a while ago that is a policy priority to fill. I mean, we have areas of the city where it is unsafe to walk. I've had the distinct displeasure of having to lead a group of students across an area in the Lower East Side where there is no route that you can find that has a safe sidewalk. And as a result, it was very unsafe, and we had to have a number of adult liaisons present. And so there was a lot of thinking that went into that. And from a policy standpoint, if you divide out that amount, which obviously you're not going to be able to fund, initially, over certain years, it makes sense, except if on a regular basis, that very small amount towards the total project will be cut and basically be rated, as a term you could use. It takes away from overall goal of eventually filling in that identified missing infrastructure. So in a way, you could, qualitatively argue that the infill is not so much an improvement but maintenance, because it's been identified almost as if there's a part, we're an old city that has part of a roadway that's dirt. Basically that's what it is. We have part of our walkways that are dirt or are currently, however inaccessible. And so from that standpoint, I really have to make the argument for sidewalk infill. It is a maintenance project. But that's my 2 cents on that. I'd like to finish my comments with that and move to Committee Member Pritchett.
Thanks. I have a variety of simple and not so simple questions. How do you all figure out how many access ramps per year? There's I don't remember what the amount is, but there's an amount. Why that amount? Why not more? What's that based on? You just a goal for so many per year, or a certain location, or what?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Pritchett, is your question that how do we determine how many to do in a year?
Yeah. Like why? Because you could imagine, 5,000 ramps would be nice to install, and
yeah.
Why? Where do you pick your number?
I believe that the answer is that we don't pick a number. We look at available funding and what will that funding accomplish. One of the things that we're doing is working with the Access Committee with regards to priority corridors. And so we are looking for ramps and sidewalk maintenance projects that fit with the goals of the Access Committee, which are the maintaining routes to destinations like medical facilities and schools and markets and parks and the like. So we do work with them on priority corridors. So we've identified the needs and the priority locations, and so it's a matter of what available funding is there to match the need. And so, as Browning explained, we utilize some grant funds, CDBG funds, city funds, and then we determine how many ramps that we can do. So we don't go out with a set number of access ramps. We actually work from the cash and determine what we can do that fit into the prioritization of the priority corridors that we work with the committees on. Does that help?
But how do you? Yeah, sure. You take the money available and find the best project. So, but how do you allocate or decide on how much money is available?
Well, let me jump in here. So traditionally, at least for the last 8 or 9 years, we were appropriating about $100,000 a year for access ramps, another $200,000 a year for sidewalk repair. The sidewalks that are uplifted by tree roots. And we were doing that up until about a year or two ago, when the economy went south and our Measure A revenue started dropping, as well as our UUT. We had to start cutting back on our capital program, and all areas were cut back. We took the funds away from the sidewalk info program. We had to cut back on the amount of money we were appropriating towards the access ramps, the money that we were using for traffic safety enhancements, the money that Drew uses for signal upgrades. So all areas were, even the money that John got, we had to just deal with the economy. John mentioned we went through an exercise a couple years ago called Share the Pain. We all had to share in the reduction. On the flip side, last spring, when the city got roughly with $3.8 million of federal stimulus money, we were sharing the wealth at that point in time. So we put a lot of money into the sidewalk repair as well as access ramps. We did a lot of access ramps on Upper De La Vina Street. We did some over on the east side using some additional CDBG money the city got from the stimulus package. We did the Mitchell-Torina corridor. We did some over on Milpas. Did a lot of access ramps as well as repairing sidewalks. So what we had to take a look at is we had to deal with, the trip and fall, the maintenance type of stuff. So we continued to pump money into sidewalk replacement, because that's a huge issue. We got a lot of trees in the city. We all know city is a tree city USA. We're going to always have problems with uplifting sidewalks. We have to put $300,000 into the sidewalks. We'll put as much money as we can into the access ramps as possible. That's why we're going to continue to go after community development block grant monies to help subsidize the amount of money that we have of our discretionary money to put into access ramps. So it's really what we can afford to do. So we kind of had to cut back in a variety of programs. Yeah, would I like to have money in the sidewalk infill? Yes, but I'm also responsible for the roadways. So if we don't put money in the roadways, it means the street crews are going to have to be going out and doing pothole patching and skim coating and all that because the roads are starting to deteriorate. So either pay now or pay later, and pay a lot more later. So it's really a balancing act that John was talking about.
Okay. So on the slide up there now on the screen, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth row is called pedestrian enhancement, sidewalk maintenance, and the top row is called pedestrian enhancement, sidewalk repair. What's the difference between repair and maintenance of a sidewalk?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Pritchett, the top line item is actually a specific project.
Right,
It's
so
the RDA downtown sidewalk repair. We could have called it maintenance. Those are two are synonymous for that purpose. So,
Okay.
yeah, a specific project is that one
So
line item.
the one called sidewalk maintenance annual, is that sort of
It's a generic.
decentralized?
That's a general term or general need for sidewalk maintenance in the
It's
city.
not in the RDA area.
Well, throughout the
it's-
city.
It's throughout the city. Basically, it's the money that the streets manager, he will identify with his staff sidewalks throughout the city that are in the worst shape that we're going to go out and do some replacement.
Okay. Well, at our last meeting, we had a robust discussion about ranking criteria for priorities. That's Exhibit B in our report. And so now we have a multiplier and points on these 5 different types of criteria. And we were told, all right, staff use this process, and that's why the list is what the list is. But I'm not, I think we would all exercise, and I'm not understanding. Give us I'll point one out, an example of how you took a proposed project and applied the prioritization matrix. For example, there's one a little bit down, I don't know if it's on there, but it's called Intersection Improvements, De La Vina Street at Figueroa Street, 144,000. Is not highlighted yellow, meaning you're not recommending to do it, but it's still moderately high on the chart. So what was the process on that project to apply this matrix? Yeah,
Would you like specific numbers as an example? Is that what you prefer?
Walk us through it to some degree.
Well, I can certainly tell you that for every project, and we can use that one as the example, then we look at exposure and see which of those points, which level of detail, where does it fit with that in that? And so we would determine for each category, exposure, cost deferral, project delivery, leverage, and city policy, we'd look and see which point value, the criteria 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, or 3 would fit that project. And so that number would be assigned to that.
Do you recall it for this particular one?
I don't.
Okay.
Brain damage if I try to remember every project. But Jessica might.
Some of,
Even if you don't remember exactly.
I don't remember
just
the exact number, but hypothetically, when we were looking at like intersection projects, for example, such as De La Vina Fig, that we, in order to assign the first category for exposure, we looked at it. So we had an example intersection with greater than 5 accidents per year for a 3-year period, received a 3. So in behind this, when we were trying to assign a number, we had all of our collision data with us. And then if there was any, and then cost deferral, again, was maintenance needs, or most of the intersection ones was just even with inflation. So that received a 1. And then project delivery on an intersection 1. They're all about medium. We usually have to do, even if it's exemption, it's probably got like a 2. And then leverage, we ranked fairly low on a lot of our intersections because we didn't have grants. Some of them did, like Creo, Anacapa.
I thought that one did.
That one had a grant, yes.
Or in
But
the pipeline eventually.
yes, and then city
So-
policy, if it was in, and then we also had all of our guiding documents to see if it was specifically mentioned or not. So that was kind of our
So you took the point, so say the exposure criterion,
Mm-hmm.
3 points times multiplier 3, you get a 9.
Right. Right.
And we're going to add them all up,
Right. So we ended up. So there was basically
and they came out in this.
because we could
sequence.
only fit so much.
Well, that's like the top
Yes.
half. That's
Yeah.
fine.
So there were separate columns to this list that
Oh, you
basically
mean you have
had.
more columns.
Yes, we had exposure, cost of deferral, project delivery leverage, and
I-
policy
I
in Excel.
recommend you make the investment in
Uh-huh.
tabloid-sized paper when
Okay.
it comes to the planning commission.
Yeah. Okay.
Put that in the package,
Okay.
because it's starting to smell like sort of a black box,
Mm-hmm.
subjective decision unless we can see how this elegant system worked out.
Okay.
And make the font really small if you need to, but
Mm-hmm.
you can fold out a tabloid page and I'd say just to present it, like the top half of the list is enough, because we all know some of them are so obscure and they're not guesstimated for funding for 5 years, so no one's even thinking about those too much. But just a way to justify and explain how we did the matrix. So for the next
Right.
public meeting.
Right.
I guess that's the planning commission we heard about. All right, that helps explain a lot of this.
Mr. Chair, I have a question on, since we're talking about one
Okay.
Great.
project.
Community member
I-
Copeland
the-
Gray.
Yeah. This committee was told that that intersection was already funded, and it was funded in a past fiscal year. So I'm very surprised to see that it's up there as being unfunded. The De La Vina and Figueroa that we were just talking about.
That's.
That's why I brought
You know
it
what?
up.
That is. Oh, okay. To clarify that, that is in that
we were
column.
told it
It's
was in the
remaining.
design stage.
That's correct.
Okay, so why
That's
is
correct.
it? So is it from another fiscal year? So why is it even on this list?
Right. So this that column says remaining project cost or estimated cost if project is not funded. What's not on here on the columns? Yeah, you'd have to
That you
see
put on the big page when you
if
get
it's
it?
funded or not. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, what's not reflected on there is already monies that we have funded for that particular project. So we have identified money, so we have funded. Depending upon what we move forward with, we might have 100% funding, or we might only have 75% funding. Until we get the conceptual design options from the designer, we won't really know how much money we need. So what I think we told the committee a few months ago when we got the Highway Safety Index money for Anacapa Carrillo, that freed up about $350,000 of city money for that project to move over to De La Vina Fig.
Yes.
So we do have 350, but based on some other designs we've done, we think we might need more depending upon the design that's come forward. Or we might not need the full 350. We really won't know until we get the conceptuals from the engineering firm that's working on it.
So in the De La Vina Figueroa Street, in this matrix, would that get 3 points for leverage? Yeah? Because you remember all the
Correct.
numbers?
Yes.
Okay. That's, I think, again, why seeing the big spread out table would help alleviate panic attacks from our perspective. Okay. There's one that's on this chart. It's called, just tell me the status of the project. Pedestrian enhancement, federal and state safe routes to schools. It's not highlighted as a recommended project because of why? I think I can guess, but.
What that one is, it's not a specific project.
Right.
So when the when Caltrans releases the request for proposals for the next go-round on the federal safe route to school, and if we are successful in receiving those funds, it'll be reflected in here. But by putting this in the in this list, it gives us the ability to go after, or at least apply for those federal Safe Route to School grants.
Because like in your proposal, you sort of say, yeah, we thought through it and it's high on our list. If only we had money. Is that why it's
Right.
on the list?
Yeah, that's one reason. The other reason.
It's not recommended for funding because it's like a grant-driven.
It's a grant-driven, so
Okay.
we're not recommending funding because we don't have the funding yet. So the other thing too is if, in order for us to, our new policy right now, in order for us to go apply for a grant, whether it be federal or state, whatever, it needs to be listed in our 6-year capital improvement program. Unless it's a grant that becomes available that nobody knew about,
Then really,
that's something unique that we have a project, hey, we think this will work
Right.
perfect for it. But we have to, our administration's been asking, all of us to do, not just transportation, but as well as engineering and everybody's, think about the projects, and if you think you might be able to get funding sometime in the future, put in your 6-year capital improvement program. We've done that in the downtown parking program as well.
okay. So when we heard the news that this state grant was announced a few days ago for safe routes to schools near La Cumbre Junior High School, that's all cool, of course. So Browning, you mentioned these funds, which may have been a little bit of a surprise, came in that freed up money for something else. What is this something else? You seem to know what you were thinking of.
Well, we have a bicycle bridge that needs replacement, and we also have a sidewalk that a couple of sidewalk areas that need sidewalk. We just haven't narrowed down what is the best use of those funds yet. So we in staff need to sit down and kind of like do the same criteria on both those projects and evaluate that and then come forward to our boss with a recommendation of which one we want to use those monies for.
Well, I'm all for bike bridges and sidewalks, especially where Ed took his field trip that has no sidewalks. So what are for that, say, that freed up money, what are the suite of potential projects? Is it just going to be the multi-million-dollar pavement maintenance category?
No.
Or will it be something in the spirit of safe routes to schools?
What we're looking at, the money that I know John would
Look
like
at
the
John.
John would love the extra $218,000 put in the pavement, but I can assure the committee that that money that we freed up, our intent is to use it for either a pedestrian project or a bicycle safety project.
That a kid going to school eventually might use.
Or it's a bicycle safety that's currently being used, but we're getting a lot of complaints on.
Okay. Okay, so are these handful of potential projects, are they on this list somewhere?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So once the funds are available, you'll apply the ranking criteria, right? The prioritization matrix.
Now, one of them's already ranked, and the other one will just see the infill. Basically, if it's a sidewalk infill, Drew has to
Okay.
apply her criteria in terms of prioritizing sidewalk infill.
Oh, that bridge, the one okay. The Goleta Slough Bridge. Yeah, that's a little bumpy.
All right.
And my last point is, we heard some remarks from Ms. Blackerby months ago, if not a year ago. We had a big to-do at this table on the potential bikeway configurations in the Oak Park neighborhood. We on the committee and the Planning Commission, I think it was a joint session, we did a lot to tease apart potential bikeway reconfigurations in the Oak Park neighborhood to separate that from the long, slow process of the freeway interchange project. And so everyone agreed that the bikeway lane options is now a separate project, so it doesn't wait forever to get the freeway interchange built. So now we're hearing it looks like you all in the staff had a meeting with the hospital, which of course is the 18,000-pound gorilla stakeholder in the neighborhood, and they had some heartburn, and now the project is on the slow track. But at the same time, we all and the public made a big to-do about identifying that as a separate project because we thought it was a high priority, and that's why we didn't want it to go into the planning slow track to get the freeway interchange money that the state doesn't have right now. So is that on the list somewhere? Because a lot of the names are kind of overly generic to me. Is that on here? On the big list?
Well, the two that you're talking about, I don't believe are on here because it's just restriping the street, and that's something that we most likely would be able to do either with a.
It's not quite a capital
It's not
project.
quite a capital
Okay.
project, but we have not received policy direction on those projects.
And by that, policy direction from which body?
City Council.
Okay. Well, we had a lot of little policy direction for what it's worth from us on this committee.
So just remind the committee. So
I don't know how to play the game. That's fine.
Well, and I don't want to get a lot of the conversation about this because it's not on the agenda. But we're talking about the capital program, and one of the capital projects that is listed in here is improving access to Cottage Hospital, Las Casitas Mission. That project study report is going to council.
Right, and you mentioned your staff report will have some kind of description in there.
Well, the report that this committee reviewed is like a 1,000-page report.
Yeah.
The council is going to receive a presentation by Jessica on the work effort, the community outreach that we did, all the recommendations that came out of that work effort. So that was the next step when we came to the committee about a little over a year ago. Is the next step was to go to City Council with your committee recommendation as well as the Planning Commission's recommendation. So we're going to be doing that in a couple of weeks. The reason it's taken us over a year is we got stopped by our Council of Government not allowing us to apply through Caltrans to start working on a project study report. That got resolved. We're moving forward with it. So if we get policy direction from Council to move forward with those, then we will. If they say no,
we'll just make sure the staff report has enough so the directors of the policy know what they're discussing. That's all.
Okay.
So someone like me doesn't have to go there and try to explain it, which that could be very dangerous. That's fine. I understand your pace now. But there's a lot of stakeholder interest depending on who you ask.
And I just want to clarify one thing. Cottage Hospital, it wasn't after we got done talking to this committee that we had a meeting with them and said, hey, that doesn't work for us. They were saying that all along throughout the process, that, hey, you guys, you are moving the road that goes to our hospital in the wrong direction. They pretty much said that, made that clear during the process. I think even at one of the public meetings, they expressed some concerns about that.
You have to study a map to see that. Okay, that's all for me. Thanks.
Great. Committee Member Tabor.
Thank you. Well, listening to Mr. Pritch's comments about the local roads part of the Cottage Hospital equation, I was looking at the what happened in the Upper State Street study, and kind of thought that a similar thing would happen. It seems like we took that Upper State Street recommendations and broke them into two parts in here. We have the shovel and concrete part, which is the $13 million part, or the big ticket item, and then we have the intersection timing part that is just a little bit of wiring and maybe some paint on the street, and that's been taken out as a separate item, and it seemed like with the proper council direction that would be something that you could do in future reports. So what we would need to do would be to have some input at that council meeting to try to make that happen, I guess is what you're saying. To pull that out and make it a separate item. Okay. I appreciate the additional information you provided this time, remembering a couple months ago looking at last year's recommendations and having the little sheets on each of the items was very helpful, and there was a lot of information in there, and the ones that I did take time to read, the ones that were dear to my heart, cleared things up for me tremendously, so I appreciate the extra information in here. One question from the Las Positas and Cliff on the timing. I noticed that the money from the state it says it's budgeted in the 2012 fiscal year. It doesn't show up as a ticket item on our program until 2013. Is that because when the state writes us a check, it doesn't come out to the end of the year and we don't get it in our bank until the following year?
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Tabor, no, I believe the money is available in fiscal 13, but the process is extremely laborious, and we'll be lucky. And my guess is that the project won't be fully designed until 13-14. So it's just a cumbersome process. It's extensive. There's a lot of components to it.
Yeah.
So, but the funding isn't available till 13, I believe.
I may have misread that. It says that it's programmed in the 2012 STIP.
Yeah. It's currently in the 2012 STIP,
Okay.
but because of the
That
challenges
doesn't
that the
have a
engineering
direct
staff.
link to funding.
What was that?
That doesn't have a direct link to funding that year.
No, it doesn't. Most likely, with the state budget the way it is, the STIP funding is not coming in the way it has been in the past. It's probably going to get pushed out anyway, but the bigger issue, though, is the challenges that engineering has with getting our project study report reviewed and approved by Caltrans. Their resources, according to the district director, has been cut back again by the legislative office, so they don't have the resources to even review PSRs anyway. So we just have a lot of challenges from a design standpoint to get it to the point where we're going to be able to even submit for funding for that project. So when it's ready to go, we're absolutely going to get funding. And right now, it is all Caltrans right away. It has to be designed and built to Caltrans standards. So we have to go through the Caltrans process.
Of course. Thank you. On the question of bike improvements, we have a pretty consistently, based on grants, putting $52,000 in there on an annual basis, and that's not targeted to a specific project every year, but I understand it's similar to our sidewalk improvements where we look for projects on an annual basis, and we may be banking some money to pay for that more expensive project, but the $52,000 is the annual amount that's dropped into our budget from state sources.
Yeah, that's correct. It's state funding. It's state transportation account.
Okay. So it's kind of hard, consistent with Commissioner Schwartz's comment earlier, for us to make comments today about specific projects in that regard. But I think in general, it's important, as Mr. France indicated, that to restate our commitment to multimodal transportation and make sure there is access for all in the manner that they choose to get from point A to point B. And as those individual projects come up, I guess it's important for us to state our preference for those and lobby for the ones as we see fit to do so. I think another angle on the bicycle improvements, for my point of view, we have identified through the general plan update process intersections. Let's look at downtown. There are intersections downtown that we have heard from the public. We do not want another car trip to go through that intersection. That's how serious we are at maintaining our quality of life. No more cars through that one intersection, unless we can improve the capacity of that intersection. And we know that improving the capacity of any of the intersections along Carrillo or Mission or any of the other main streets downtown would cost $10 million at least to acquire right-of-way, pour all the concrete, bridge improvements, and et cetera. We also have conducted surveys of people who work downtown who say they would ride a bike downtown if there were better facilities downtown to accommodate them when they got here. It costs $2,000 to put a bike locker in. So we can get one car out of that intersection, and by putting a $2,000 bike locker in, but to improve the capacity of that intersection, we'd have to spend money that we don't have. But we know we don't have the money to maintain what we have now. So I think that's an important angle to consider in the multimodal approach too, that additional capacity for cars is not going to happen in our lifetime with the budgets that we see in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But we can improve the ways people have to get to work, to get to school, to get where they need to get at a much lower ticket cost, and maybe improve the quality of the intersection too by getting some cars out of that intersection. So I think that's an important point to make there too. I wasn't here the last meeting, so I didn't get my 2 cents worth in on the ranking, and I'm going to defer to the current ranking system because of that, but something rubs me the wrong way. And the last comment leads me into that. As Commissioner Schwartz said, our policies are our core values. Those are the things that we have heard from the community, the ideals we want to live by. We've had hundreds of meetings and hundreds of hours of staff time and public coming and testifying and giving up their work hours to come to meetings and testify, and we sit and make a consensus on what's the best way for us to go. When an applicant comes into us, we pick up this document and say, you have to follow A, B, and C or your project doesn't get our consent. But somehow, I understand that money is very important for us, and I look at this as if it's my budget. I know I can't afford to put a new roof on this year, even though my roof is 25 years old. So I'm just going to sit here this winter and cross my fingers and hope I don't have any leaks, and maybe budget for it next year. Putting some money aside. I am putting money aside. I'm not buying a new shirt. I have to wear a jacket to cover an ink stain over here. But a new shirt's in the budget next year. But to see on here that exposure, something that has a very low degree of exposure gets 3 points in the ranking system, but something that's a high city priority, policy priority, only gets 2 points. Something that has zero cost, additional cost related to deferral of the project gets 3 points, but something that is the top of the rank on city policy only gets 2 points. That's part of it about the ranking that rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I don't know if I can understand the project delivery system and why it's in there, but again, as land use planning consultant and one who makes a living on the city process and help to develop the process that we have today, just because a project has to go through the process or has a few more impacts doesn't mean it's not a good project. I can understand why it's in there, but also being somebody who lives on the mesa and on that side of the magic line that's the coastal zone, it means that any project that's south of shoreline or south of Cabrillo or near a waterway automatically is going to get fewer points, even though it may be a very important project. So I don't know how to accommodate that, but I'd hate to see those projects not go forward just because they're on the wrong side of that line. Thank you.
Quick comment from Committee Member Pritchett.
Dave, you're getting to the substance that was a lot of our discussion last time.
I understand. That's why I'm doing. Maybe next year.
Or 2 years from now, because there's not a lot of money to spread around to really worry about this elegant system. But I don't recall that our committee really voted on this scheme. We talked about it. And I left the meeting last time thinking that two prioritization approaches would be applied, and we would see if they came up different and have a gee whiz moment to see if they did. I would still like to see the multiplier for city policy be a 2, and like Mr. Tabor said, project delivery perhaps be a 1, and that does, I think, reflect more where community values, policy positions, and so on. You know, it may not be that big a deal now because we're it's an exercise because there's not a lot of money to go around. I was going to say something about deck chairs, but I changed my mind. But again, like I said, if the next public meeting has a bigger display of how these numbers worked out, I think that would help people figure it out. But while I'm talking, can you explain the scope of one of these projects? The yellow highlighted row, second from the bottom, intersection improvements, traffic safety, and capacity. So this sounds like these are just yet unspecified intersections.
What that is that's money that traffic operations has to do variety of traffic safety things they might identify, whether it be changing out a pedestrian head or changing out a signal cabinet or putting new signage in. It's money that Drew and her staff, as well as the electronic maintenance staff, has available to them to do safety improvements.
Could that include pedestrian signal installation countdown timers?
We are using some of that money for some wiring, but not, it's pretty expensive to do that. We did put through the stimulus money, we're changing out all the existing pedestrian heads with countdown timers. We have some extra ones that over some time we will be identifying funding to install those, and we're using some money that Drew has in that account from last year to do some of that work.
How about on a qualitative scale? For that line item project, intersection improvements, how much of the improvement helps a pedestrian mode of travel versus a motor vehicle mode of travel? Roughly, best estimate.
Well, it's hard to say. Basically, it's balancing it for everybody. If it's not safe for a vehicle, we're going to address it. If it's not safe for a pedestrian, we're going to address it, but it also makes it safe for a vehicle. But we take a look at on a case-by-case basis. We're having a problem with an intersection. Drew and our traffic engineer, they're going to take a look at it. What can we do there to make changes? It might just simply being different signage up there. Might be a different signal head configuration. It could be a variety of things, but I leave it up to the traffic engineer working with our operations supervisor to figure out what we need to do at an intersection that identify where there is a safety problem or we have a capacity problem. Maybe the cars aren't flowing through there as efficiently as they can, and they might have to change out the cabinet to give a different phasing or of the signals there. So the variety of things, like in fact, Bevmo is a good example where that just went in. We had to change out the phasing on that, but they had to put new conduit in. That was the account they used to pay for that work.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Committee Member Pritchett. Before I entertain a motion on accepting these reports, which I believe we should do, I'd like to make a quick comment. Definitely, we've heard three different voicings of the Las Positas, Cottage Hospital, traffic access improvement in the Oak Park neighborhood. It is also my perception that aside from simply the TCC, the public comment, however Cottage Hospital weighed in, public comment was overwhelming that there were improvements that could be made independent of the freeway off-ramp, right? And, I would certainly entertain a motion if somebody wanted to motion to staff to present the feasibility of that project separate from the longer-term project. However, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate. It could be an appropriate thing for this committee to do. I think it would fall upon deaf ears at City Council currently. I don't think there's a lot of motivation to look at any projects that could improve bikeability, walkability, traffic calming, even though some of those improvements would actually certainly improve traffic because a one-way would reduce the 2 left-hand turn slowdowns on Mission from the off-ramp of the freeway, which actually would be a noticeable traffic flow improvement. That said, I think in the future it would behoove this committee to try to make more clear motions to communicate with staff, because I think sometimes we have input that seems like it might go in a certain direction, but that doesn't necessarily always communicate that clearly. And I think that was the case in this matter.
Well, let me just clarify that Cottage Hospital's expression about Castillo Street has not removed that from consideration. Staff has not taken a position one way or the other. We have not received policy direction from the City Council on the off mainline improvements. We as staff cannot move forward with that until we have received policy recommendation from council.
Absolutely.
So on the 16th is the first time the city council is going to hear the report. This committee as well as planning commission had the benefit of hearing that about a year and a half ago. Now it's the city council's turn. Now the council can give us direction to move forward with those improvements, or they could say, no, we don't want you to do it, or leave it on the back burner for the next 10 years. We don't really know that until we go to the city council. But I can tell you, what the action is. We're trying to hire a consultant to move forward with the project study report to put us in position to be able to go after federal and state money to do the major project, which is improving access to Cottage Hospital, the interchange project.
Yeah, and I'm very clear on that. The point I'm making, I think, is in terms of this committee's communication, our motion, if we would make one, would probably be to recommend that in the staff report, it be made clear that an option would be to break apart those projects that could be done independent of the other project, so that council has that option clearly set forth if they would like to then take upon it.
What I can do is we'll go back and look at the motion that this committee and the planning commission made a year and a half ago, and I believe what you're saying is pretty consistent with what was done a year and a half ago, and Jessica's here. Yeah, so we'll go back and look at that. We'll make sure that the council gets a copy of your minutes. You can't make a motion tonight because it's not on the agenda. It'll be a violation of the Brown Act, and we're kind of and we're really treading on grounds right now, even having this conversation.
I'm glad to.
In terms of the capital program, in terms of what's in the document moving forward, we are going to council, requesting to hire IBI so we can move to the next phase in terms of preparing the project study report. And what we were presenting the entire report to the city council. And then we'll report back to this committee at your next meeting, which I most likely be in January, with the results of that. I encourage any committee member to go to the city council meeting on the 16th.
Great.
And if that date changes, I need to sit down with Jessica on Monday to see if we need to make some adjustments of what we're presenting. We might have to postpone that item. So I don't know that until Monday. And if we do, it'll just be a week.
Great. And thanks for trying to make that more clear. All right. Do we need to entertain a motion to accept these reports? If so, would you entertain that motion?
I would move, if we can do them both, I would move to receive the MTD reports and the Streets Fiscal Year 2012 Capital Improvement Program Budget Report.
Any seconds?
Second.
Great. All four?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining?
You didn't ask. I support receiving your report. You didn't ask for discussion,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. But I think really the action. I think just about anything on the agenda is subject to a motion if the body wants to do it. And the meeting procedures are pretty clear on that. But our action is, we didn't light our hair on fire objecting to something drastic, and it's now going to the next step at the Planning Commission, right? So that's fine. So we're not just receiving it, unless you interpret that meaning. And I think bikeways in the Oak Park neighborhood are a project fully eligible for discussion because of the way this agenda item is described. And anyway, there's other neighborhood meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, and as an FYI, I can let people know once I look it up.
Great. Any other discussion on the motion on the floor?
Oh, I thought you voted.
Oh, I guess we did vote. I thought you backtracked. All right, so we have received the reports. If there's no other items, I think we can motion to adjourn.
Just real quick, my staff informed me that the meeting where we're going to council is November 9th, not the 16th. So I've confirmed that with another item we're going to council on.
Right. Put on the public
Cool.
record, November 9th. And what is the topic item? Is it the Las Positas interchange?
Professional service agreement for improving access to Cottage Hospital - project study report.
Great. Thank you.
And that's like the project study report's like a Caltrans planning product.
Great.
You're right.
All right, it is 8:04. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
All right, all four.
Aye.
Hey, my turn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time.